In the year 2020, a red panda and a talking sandwich began a podcast called Judgement. As the podcast grew, they began attracting the attention of the dreaded podcast bots.
Now, in 2022, beginning their third season, they must make their way through all of the Terminator films. Wait, even Genesis?
Yes, even Genesis.
Oh man. Well, at least it's no Birdemic.
Welcome to Chatsunami. Hello everybody and welcome to the third season of Chatsunami. I wish it was under better circumstances, but as you can hear in the background, we are under attack by podcast bots. Right now I have travelled back in time to the year 2022 in hopes of really just stopping them. So honestly, I could not have done this mission alone. I've had to bring in an expert on the topic we're going to be talking about today, and I think I hear him now. Yep, there he is, Adam, the man, the myth, Adam, are you naked?
Nice night for a podcast, eh?
You do know you can use the time machine with your clothes on.
Look, okay, I don't know how much you know about time travel, but only organic sandwich material can make the time travel journey.
Okay, which Doctor Who fan did you talk to that said that?
I talked to all of them and they all told me the exact same thing.
Are you sure they weren't just hungry?
Well, I spoke to Tommy Cooper and he told me that it was all fine.
I mean, he wore a fez. In your defence, he wore a fez.
To me, isn't that Doctor any man wearing a fez is Doctor Who to me.
Yeah, that is indeed true. But yeah, don't worry, we're not going to be talking about that particular film with Matt Smith. Other than the podcast bots, or PBs as we call them around here, other than them, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. I mean, the Chatsunami studio has definitely changed since we were last here. I don't remember quite as many human and sandwich skulls littering the ground, but you know what? I'm still happy to be back, and I'm incredibly excited to be getting in on this journey. This is something that I know me and you have been talking about for a while now, Satsu, and that we're finally pulling the trigger, so to speak, is incredibly exciting.
So just before we go on, what does a sandwich skull look like?
What do you think it looks like? Let's throw it back at you.
Is it just a sandwich but bone?
Do you not know when you have a sandwich and you hear that crunch? You think it's the lettuce, let me tell you.
You lost a lot of family members that way.
A sandwich aside, as I call it.
The great Subway incident of 2025. Anyway, sorry. We're spoiling the future for you guys. Today we have indeed travelled back in time to the year 2022, where we are going to be doing Terminator Month, which is the only way we're going to stop these PBs. And see, in all honesty, this is actually one of the films that brought us together closer as friends, isn't it?
Well, literally, I think we may have talked about this back in maybe season 1, but I consider that there are 3 pillars to the friendship that me and Satsunami have. One is Deadly Premonition, which we've done an episode on. Another one is D&D, which you did, your very first episode of Chatsunami was on. The third, and technically the first, and you might argue the most important, as it did set us off on the path towards where we are now, was Terminator 1 and Terminator 2.
So for anyone who doesn't know, Adam and I ended up meeting because one of our mutual friends asked us to go to the cinema where they were showing a double bill of Terminator 1 and 2. Both fantastic films, but yeah, because I didn't realise, I hadn't really met you at that point, or maybe I'd met you once or twice, but I hadn't really spoken to you. And then afterwards, you and I were just talking about Terminator, being like, oh, that was so cool, this bit was so cool. And yeah, as you said, it was that kind of snowball effect, wasn't it?
Yeah, literally everything that happened up till now is because of that. So incredible. I mean, these were already very important films to me to begin with, but that extra layer has lifted them into hallowed territory now for me. Where I am, I'm like, it's all because of Terminator 1 and Terminator 2.
And I nearly spoiled the friendship between us when I said that your favourite film was Terminator Salvation.
I don't think we'll ever quite get over that. Our friendship is now divided into 2 distinct zones. There's the pre-salvation gaff, as I call it, the post-salvation gaff. Can never go back.
We're working through our issues, okay? We're working through them.
You're just lucky all these PBs are the immediate threat right now.
If the PBs went around, we would be going to podcast counselling, okay?
You said you'd go. You promised.
Look, it's not my fault that PBs have destroyed the world, okay? Them with their self-promotions and reality records and all of that rubbish. How was I supposed to know?
You're right. They're the true enemy. The true enemy. We can't be distracted.
And indeed, as you said, we are going to be talking about, at least today in this episode, we are going to be talking about is it right to say the golden age of Terminator? Where we're going to be talking about the first and second film?
I mean, I think if anybody posited a different golden age, I would seriously question would seriously question them on their life decisions and life choices. I mean, but yeah, like for me personally anyway, this is quite clearly the golden age and the silver age and the bronze age.
So what you're saying is Terminator Salvation isn't the quadrilogy that you hoped for?
I mean, despite my apparent love of that film, it's not quite in the golden age, I must admit.
You know, you're amongst friends here, and PBs, but you're amongst friends here. You can admit it.
It's not going to happen. Not today.
I know a particular scene you're thinking of, and it's too early for cursing.
I'm going through the list in my head right now, so be careful.
I can hear it right now. But, yeah, these films are quite possibly some of the best sci-fi films you will ever see in your life. You know, you've got your Aliens and Predators, and, you know, you've got all these films that at the time came round, and they were really just bookmarks of the time for what science fiction movies could become. But see, before we jump into it, what attracted you to these films, Adam? Because I know you are an absolute mega fan of these films. What was it about Terminator? Because for me personally, I would say it was more the pop culture side for me. So, you know, people talk about Terminator, they say, I'll be back, and you know, they say all the lines and things, so that's what introduced it to me. But I'm quite curious for you, was that the same, or?
Not quite for me. So I remember at the time that Terminator 3 was about to be released, I remember seeing some trailers for it. And I was 11 when Terminator 3 came out. And it was like, I was like, oh, this looks really cool. And, you know, I was getting into like action films and kind of like war films and things like that. So I was like, oh, this looks really cool. I want to see more. And I didn't really even think about it being like a third film. It didn't really register with me. And I remember like talking about it to my mum. And my mum is a really big fan of Terminator 1 and Terminator 2. And she kind of started to talk about the first two films. I was like, oh, they sound really cool. Like, I was like, oh, can I watch them? Now, at the time, Terminator 1 was rated an 18. It's now a 15, I think, but I'm sure it was still an 18 at that point, classification-wise, and Terminator 2 was a 15. I don't know if I was incredibly persuasive or whether my mum just wanted to watch them again. Mum was like, okay, right, before we go see the third one, I'll show you 1 and 2. So we went and watched 1 and 2, and I just remember being absolutely hooked into them and just being like absolutely captivated and loving them like from the very start. I will admit that Terminator 3 was my favourite Terminator film for a very brief period because I saw it in the cinema, but jumping ahead here, we'll come to that film later. But very quickly, my favourite Terminator film became centred on this period. I wonder how long it'll take the audience to figure out which of these two is my favourite. How quickly will I give the game away? But I'm not going to spoil it right here. But yeah, really my mum got me into them and just getting more interested in films at the time Terminator 3 came out. A nice little lucky coincidence, I would say, got me into this series.
Looking back on it, I remember Terminator, at least Terminator 2. I don't know about Terminator 1, but definitely for Terminator 2, I always remember it was on a channel here called ITV2. And ITV2, for any British listeners out there, it is, I wouldn't say infamous, but is rather well known for rerunning the same films over and over again. It's actually how I got to know what Starship Troopers was, fun fact. I actually remember watching Starship Troopers on ITV2, not to my parents' knowledge, like they weren't in the room, otherwise they would have turned it off right away. But yeah, for Terminator 2, I think I watched it, or some of it anyway, with my family, but that was more when I was older, because I'm going to be honest, I was a bit of a scaredy cat when I was a child. There's a particular scene, I don't know if, have you ever heard of a show, this is going off tangent, but have you ever heard of a show called Earth Warp?
Doesn't ring a bell for me.
If there's any British listeners out there, like maybe you'll be able to help me out here, but it was like this educational show that they used to show us in primary school, and basically it was about an alien crash lands onto Earth in like a random English village, and they're like, oh, what's this? And I always remember the end of the end of the first episode scared the poop out of me, genuinely, because the way they ended behind it is like it pans up onto this dark beach, and all you see is a silhouette of like this. It's like one of these rubbery, aliens that you would see in like the old Doctor Who's or something like that. And then, like, after hearing the like ominous music and this thing waddling away, it goes into the cheery theme song. It's a bit like if we started the show like really seriously, and then we had the OG theme going, and it terrified me. So going into something like Terminator, I definitely had to be a lot older. But going back to what I was saying before, it's just such a fantastic film. I remember seeing bits of it, and obviously get my eyes shielded for some of the other more. I wouldn't say it's the. Would you say these are the goriest films of the series?
I mean, it's been a while since I've seen the others, but I definitely think these ones particularly are, especially the second one. The second one has some like pretty horrifying stuff in it. Rewatching it, like the first one is very much like infused with horror, and there are some elements in there, but the second one has some particular scenes. Like I'm thinking of the bit where the T-1000 like points his finger through the security guard's eye and stuff. I'm like, that is, it's like, holy shit, that's pretty extreme.
I was thinking of that as well. But then again, you didn't have to endure emotional pain while watching it.
Good point, which if anything is the worst. So you know what, I'll take the eye twitching like scene any day over the emotional pain of the later series.
But see, without any further ado, I think we better move away from this location, because either the PBs have spotted us or they realise we're talking about a podcast episode. So should we move to safer ground?
Satsu, come with me if you want to be famous on Spotify.
Oh no, I've got to you too. But yeah, we will have to move location. So listen to these transmissions if you want to be safe, and we will see you in just a moment. Welcome to Shatsunami, a variety podcast that discusses topics from gaming and films to anime and general interests.
Previously on Chatsunami, we've analysed what makes a good horror game, conducted a retrospective on Pierce Brosnan's run as James Bond, and listened to us take deep dives into both the Sonic and Halo franchises.
Also, if you're an anime fan, then don't forget to check us out on our sub-series, Chatsunani, where we dive into the world of anime. So far, we've reviewed things like Death Note, Princess Mononoke, and the hit Beyblade series.
If that's sounds like your cup of tea, then you can check us out on Spotify, iTunes, and all good podcast apps.
As always, stay safe,
stay awesome, and most importantly,
stay hydrated.
I'm Dan.
I'm Lou, and together we are Casting Views.
An uncle and nephew chatting on random topics, some heavy, some fun, but we aim to amuse.
Don't miss out, don't delay. Subscribe to Casting Views today.
You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, and Good Pods.
And we are back. So, as we were saying before, we are going to be tackling Terminator 1 and 2. And honestly, there is no better person in the world that, well, maybe James Cameron, but second best person who can really tackle this and give these films the justice they deserve. It's, of course, Adam, who is it right to say super fan?
I think I'm very close to being a super fan of these two films, I'll be honest. There's other people out there, and there's other people that we both know who might rival me. It might actually, to be honest, surpass me in like fandom, but I hold these films very near and very dear to my heart.
Without any further ado, I am going to pass this on to you. The torch has been lit. Actually, I better put out this torch before the PBs see it.
Come on, dude, that's like 101 of that's 101 of surviving the PB nuclear landscape that we're in.
What have you not seen Hunger Games where they light a giant campfire?
Oh, you know what? Good point. I retract my statement.
I'm sure that person won the Hunger Games. Yeah, I have to admit, I don't remember the film at all, but I'm sure that person won.
Why do I feel like you'll light the torch and like do the sensible thing? Then it'll be like the Jurassic Park scene. I'll come out like Dr. Malcolm and be like, "Hey!" and just make everything worse.
Or better yet, the moment in the Fellowship of the Ring. Do you remember that? Where they're cooking 50th breakfast on the mountainside. He's like, "Put it out, you fools!"
Bacon, mushroom, sausages.
They nearly got killed for a fry-up. You gotta respect that. Anyway, sorry, the floor is yours, Adam.
Well, we can't really talk about the history of Terminator 1 and Terminator 2 without briefly diving into the director of the two of them, James Cameron, who's now probably most famous for directing films like Titanic and Avatar 2, Avatar 3, Avatar 5000, probably by the end. But before any of those came out, James Cameron's directorial debut was a film called Piranha 2. Have you ever heard of Piranha 2, Satsu, or have you seen Piranha 2 potentially?
I have not heard of this at all, to be honest. I heard of it when I was researching this episode, but genuinely never heard of Piranha 2.
Well, I think James Cameron would rather he stayed in that ignorance of the film, because it's not something that he's particularly talked about with much reverence and passion. So Piranha 2 was a low-budget sort of horror, a kind of creature horror flick that James Cameron originally joined to be the special effects director, but after the main director was fired by the studio, James Cameron was elevated to be the film director, and this was the first film that he directed. Wasn't particularly a pleasant experience by all accounts. He said he's not spoken very highly about it, and for a long time he disowned this film. He's become more like willing to acknowledge it now as his first film. But importantly, during the filming of Piranha 2, James Cameron fell ill, and while he was ill, he had a dream/nightmare about a metallic torso holding kitchen knives dragging itself from an explosion. And this is really the genesis of, pardon the pun there, of the Terminator franchise. And so thinking of this, Cameron took a sketch of the dream that he'd had and thought this would be a very kind of cool idea to base a film around. So, he put together a script, put together some ideas, and he decided that he wanted to try and create a kind of slasher type film based off this dream, kind of taking influence from films like Halloween, which had come out not long before. His agent at the time was not a fan of this, didn't think it was a good idea, and he really tried to dissuade James Cameron from pursuing this course of action. Cameron's response was to promptly fire his agent, and then he began work on it. And so he drew influences from kind of older 1950s sci-fi films and 1960s kind of fantasy TV series, and sort of contemporary films of the late 70s and the early 80s, especially things like Mad Max 2. So he managed to secure studio funding after several tries, and he was given a budget of $6.4 million to make The Terminator, which was released on the 26th of October, 1984. Now I'm gonna turn the floor over to you here, Satsu. Give us all a brief plot synopsis of The Terminator.
So the plot of Terminator is about a woman called Sarah Connor, who is really just living a normal, mundane 80s life. And what she doesn't realise is that a killer robot from the future has been sent to hunt her down and kill her. And in retaliation for that, the human resistance of the future has sent back a person from their ranks to try and protect this woman. And what is revealed later is Sarah Connor is going to give birth to the future leader of mankind, John Connor, where he will rise up against the machines Skynet and, lead them all to victory. But of course the machines clock that and say, wait a minute, if we do the old time travel thing and we kill him before he's born, then we'll be able to win the war. So it's very much a cat and mouse story where Sarah and this new character, Kyle Reese, both of them are running away from the killer Terminator, played by, I wish I could say this was his debut, but I think it was like Hercules in New York, wasn't it? Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
That was his first film.
Conan as well before this, but yeah, Hercules was his actual debut.
Arnie does a fantastic job in this film, can I just say? I know he's supposed to be an emotionless robot, but he does a fantastic job in this. And is that a good enough plot, or is there anything I've missed?
That was excellent, as all your synopses are. That was excellent, and the perfect jumping off point for us to get into the Terminator. So I'm going to presume that you like this film. If I'm wrong, please tell me. Like, as a matter of interest, was this the first Terminator film that you saw, or did you see any of the others prior?
No, the first Terminator film I'm pretty sure I saw was Terminator 2.
Oh, interesting.
As I said before, Terminator 2 came on ITV2 on TV a lot when I was younger, when the TV channel couldn't afford to put Liar Liar on for like the 50th time. And they decided to put on Terminator 2 in the evening. And I would say, it's probably the first one, because I actually don't remember when I saw this film first of all. I genuinely think us going to the cinema might have been the very first time I sat down and fully watched it from start to finish.
Really? Wow.
Well, if I had seen it in the past, I definitely forgot about it. Like, I might have seen snippets of it, but it's not a film I've sat down and I've watched it. So, being forced into a cinema, wedged in between two people, I was forced to watch the full thing from start to finish. And can I just say, I love this film. I think this film is quite possibly near perfection. I'm going to go as far to say this film is near perfection as far as sci-fi films go.
I mean, not to be coy or anything, but I'm inclined to agree with you on that opinion there. So I guess I can presume that you like this. Just going from what you said there, I'm going to take it that you generally like this film. But what specifically is it about the Terminator that you really like?
It's one of these films that's held on a pedestal of iconic pop culture references. You know, as I said in the intro, you've got the I'll be back, bleep you, bleep hole. You know, there's like loads of terms, loads of scenes. Come with me if you want to live as well. You've got all these scenes that mesh into this very iconic film. But as you said, it's like, what makes this different compared to something like, I don't know, Robocop or Alien or something like that? What I can say is it has its own identity and it has a simplistic, well, relatively simplistic story that is done so well. Can I gush about the intro for this film?
Gush away about any part of this film. I'm not going to interrupt you, I promise.
The reason I love this film, and I went back obviously for this episode to rewatch the film, and what I never realised was, see the intro, there's no like big monologue, there's no, in the year 20 whatever, humanity has been destroyed by Skynet. There's nothing like that. All it shows you is a ruined future, robots going through it, just complete desolation. They roll the credits for the iconic Terminator theme, and it sets it up perfectly. You can go into the semantics of, oh, time travel, how does that work and things, but deep down, I personally think this is a very simple story. It's about a machine trying to kill a woman, and she is running away. She finds the short-lived love of her life as she runs away, and he's trying to do everything he can to protect her for the future of the human race. It's a simple setup. It's this guy trying to save the woman. He ends up, as I said, he ends up falling in love with her, and it's just so well done. Like, I know I keep saying, oh, it's so well done, like a broken record, but it's the simplicity that I love about this film. The one thing I'll say is the effects. Obviously, it's a film made in the 80s, so the effects don't hold up maybe as well, but everything has a purpose. Everything, like from start to finish, every single scene has a point. Every scene pushes the plot along, and really, it is just fantastic filmmaking, personally.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I really agree with that point about the kind of simplicity of this film. I think is one of its great strengths. And I think that really came from it having a very, like, $6 million is still a lot of money. Don't get me wrong. But for even if we take into account, like, inflation and things like that, $6 million was probably more in the 80s than it is now. But even that is not a large amount to make a film. And I think that is a real strength of that for James Cameron having to work, with such a restrictive budget. I think it's such an economical film. Like, I don't feel there's any wasted motion in this film. I don't know how you feel about that, but I don't feel like there's anything here that drags or like slows down. I don't look at the film and be like, that's a bit bloated, a bit too long. I feel like everything moves along at the perfect pace, and that's why I think it makes it so rewatchable. Like, you can just sit down, you're just going to be swept along and just be like completely drawn in for the whole, like, was it like an hour 40 or something like that? Maybe an hour. It's probably an hour 40. I think you're just going to be swept along, and you're not going to feel the time drag at all. One thing I particularly like about this film, and I think another thing that I think makes it really stand out from other films in the Terminator series, is those kind of brief moments where we get to see, the future after the kind of nuclear Armageddon, and when the machines are trying to basically wipe out the last kind of vestiges of humanity. In a lot of the other films, when they portray that period, it's very much portrayed as a war, like a straight up war. Like, obviously Skynet has a lot more advanced technology and everything than the humans, but it still feels like a kind of a human army that's fighting like a robot machine army army. Well, what I love about the first film is it really feels like a resistance movement. They're always called the resistance, the human thing, but they always to me feel more like an army, while in this first film they generally look like a kind of ragtag bunch of guerrillas who are using whatever comes to hand, and you can see it in the rusting, like, jury-rigged vehicles that they drive around in, like the kind of tattered clothes and everything they're wearing, and they're literally like crawling through like burnt out buildings and like mountains of bones to like basically like hit and run HKs and Skynet tanks and everything. And you also as well get to see actual like civilian life in this world, which I know Terminator Salvation has a bit of that as well, but there's something about like the scenes in this one where you're watching like literally humanity just clinging on desperately, trying to like stave off extinction however they can, and you get bits of a human family just sheltering in this like bombed out building as our main protagonist Sergeant Kyle Reese as he goes on his mission. And then we go down into a shelter, and there's like humans like chasing down rats to get food. And there's one bit that I always think is great is you see the back of a television set, and you see, I think it's like two girls looking at it, and then it kind of turns around and it's just like obviously the screen smashed and everything, it's just like a little fire. It's always, I thought, something really good. And it just, I mean, as weird as it is to say enjoying watching this like brutal like future, it just really adds this to me. It makes it so much more effective. This generally looks like it is a resistance movement that are just trying as hard as they can just to like keep humanity alive. And we hear a lot more, there is like a kind of genocide Holocaust element to this, especially when Kyle Reese talks about his upbringing in the camps and everything. And it's something that I don't think the other films ever bothered to explore, or if they did, I don't think they ever really fully effectively looked at it in a way that I think Terminator 1, with its very brief scenes. And it was very interesting, you mentioned this when we were like messaging back and forth about this. You talked about these scenes as being like PTSD flashbacks from Kyle Reese, and like I think that is the best way to describe it, and it's another thing that I think makes his character and the film so great. That's just one thing that I really like, but literally everything else you've said as well, like I completely co-sign. I think it's very near perfect, this film. Again, with you, like maybe the effects are the only thing I might say don't hold up, but then again, as you've already said, it was the mid-80s, and as well we got to factor this is a very low budget film. They were really trying to make do with what they had, so it isn't of the best quality, but for me it doesn't harm the film in any kind of way at all.
One thing I just want to point out, just going back to the quote-unquote flashback scenes to the future, which again I totally agree with what you were saying there, I think they're fantastically done, but I feel as if for this film, and maybe we'll get onto it, but maybe by extension Terminator 2 as well, is the scarcity of these scenes in the future. Kyle talks about a world of, as you said, the machines, the hunter killers, the T-800s, and all of these like horrible machines. Like there's literally one scene, and I shouldn't be laughing, but there's one scene where Reese and one of his colleagues, I want to say, or one of the resistance members, goes out and gets absolutely blasted by like this laser. He doesn't do the stereotypical Hollywood thing, where like if his friend gets blown up, he goes, "No!" and then he runs out and shoots. He has a very subtle emotion. Like, did you pick up on that, where he kind of looks and he's just like, he shakes his head as if not another one. Like, he doesn't say anything. He just kind of shakes his head as if, damn, this has happened again.
You're completely right, and it's such an effective moment, as you say, because it conveys so much about not only his character but this world, where like so many people have died already that there's no time to mourn individual people. It's just it is just that way of just like, as you say, just not another one. And it's so quickly, like it's almost like he doesn't have time, like he can't afford to like ruminate on this, because it feels like he's holding himself together like barely as he is. And if he like stops, maybe the whole thing is just going to collapse in on him. So I completely agree.
It's just so well done. Personally, I think the whole future sequences, like you see the brutality of the machines as well. Actually, here's a question for you, and apologies for throwing questions back at you, but would you say this is probably the most brutal we see the Terminators? Obviously, as we said, you've got in Terminator 2, you've got the T-1000 that stabs people through the eye and everything. You get horrors in the modern age, but see, in terms of the future, have we ever seen a film that portrays the Terminators as being utterly ruthless killers. Like, even in Salvation, where, you know, you've got a film that is focused completely in the future, it all seems like kind of generic. And again, I won't dive too much into it because this isn't a Salvation retrospective yet, but, you know, they all seem kind of generic. Oh no, they shot everyone. Oh, but in this film, you genuinely get like a Terminator going into like a civilian area, shooting up the place, even shooting the dogs that are trying to warn them. Oh no, this is, you know, a Terminator. Would you say this is the most brutal film in terms of like portraying that dystopian future?
100%. And we get that right from the beginning. Like, the T-800 wipes out those street punks right at the beginning, which, shout out to young Bill Paxton right there with his spiky mohawk. I think one of his first film roles, but they get instantly wiped out, and, you know, they're just street punks, so perhaps we don't really care all that much. But then, like, we watch Arnie's T-800 drive up to this house, like, crushing this child's toy. He then gets out, and then, you know, he's basically, he's going after, as you said, Sarah Connor, because she's the mother of John Connor, the leader of the Resistance. But the Skynet doesn't know, like, there's 3 Sarah Connors living in, they know she lived in the Los Angeles area, but they don't know which Sarah Connor it is, so there's 3, so he basically gets hold of a phone book, and he's just going down methodically down the 3 of them. And so he gets to one of the houses, and he knocks on the door, and, you know, the one opens up, and he's like, Sarah Connor, and she's like, yes, and he just, like, smashes the door open, pulls out his 45 handgun, and just proceeds to shoot her in the head, and then a couple more times just to be sure. And it's this really methodical, as you say, like, brutally efficient way of eliminating people, and we see it as well, like, when he takes out the real Sarah Connor's flatmate and, like, her boyfriend. As you said, there's no remorse to this. He's not, like, the Terminator it doesn't kill every single human being that it comes across, but it shows a complete willingness to eradicate any human life that stands in its way. And that I always think back to one of my favorite scenes in the film is when the T-800 attacks the police station, right about the midway point. So basically Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese are basically taken in by the police because they basically think that Kyle Reese is mad, which you could see why. Even though he's not mad, you could see why. And they take him in, but so the T-100 attacks, and that's where we get the famous "I'll be back" line. He drives the car into the police station, and then he begins to, like, hunt through the police station to find Sarah Connor, and he's just taking out all these, like, cops who are, like, powerless against him because, you know, even though they've got guns and everything, they can't make any kind of dent on him, and he's just, like, gunning them down in this really brutal and efficient manner. And it's saturated throughout the whole film, and it really is the Terminator is portrayed as this relentless figure, and that's where Kyle has that great speech where he's like, it can't be bargained with, it can't be reasoned with, pleaded with, like, it feels no fear, nothing, it won't stop until its mission's done. And the film portrays that so well. Arnie is my personal favorite actor of all time. Like, I'm not here to tell you he's the best actor of all time, but he's my favorite. But I completely agree. I think you did say you think this is his best role, didn't you? Or did you say that? Sorry, am I putting words in your mouth?
Yes, I think that people will probably say when they're criticising this film, oh, how hard is it to be like a robot? But have you ever seen a show called, I think it was Humans?
I feel like I've asked this before, and if I get the wrong show, please just tell me. But is that the one with, like, the ghosts and the werewolves and the vampires? Am I thinking of something completely different?
No, I know the one you're thinking of.
What's that called? Humans, the one I'm thinking of. I just completely confused it. For context, there was like I think it was on the BBC, there was this British show, probably near 10 years old now, actually, probably, isn't it? Or something like that, but that was to do with, like, werewolves and vampires and ghosts. And I'm sure that's not me asked me if I've seen the show called Humans, and I always think of it as that one, but I'm probably wrong. But anyway, sorry, so I don't think I've seen the one that you're talking about.
Humans is a 2015 drama from Channel 4. So to all the British listeners, you'll be like, woo, Channel 4. Humans is about these androids. It's basically like Detroit Become Human. Domestic androids have become, like, such a widespread thing, and it's basically like a better version of Detroit Become Human, if you can believe that. Anyway, the point is, in Humans, the actors actually went through, like, a lot of classes to learn how to be robots, because a lot of the cast members are supposed to be, like, these very synthetic, like, for example, for me, I would be like, hello, my name is Satsunami, how can I help you? You know, obviously that's terrible, but they did all these things so they could copy the mannerisms, they could copy how they walked, how they talked, how they would interact with certain things. And it's a fantastic show, first of all. I would wholeheartedly recommend it because I keep slipping it into every episode until Adam watches it. I'm like, go on, it's on Netflix, go on, go on. But my point going back to Terminator is it's easy for someone to say, oh, he doesn't have to act because he's a robot. But I think the way he walks, the way he holds his, because I mean, back in the 80s, and I mean, technically nowadays, even though he's older, but Arnie is like a beefy guy. You know, he's a bodybuilder. That's what he's famous for. You know, his action films and being muscular as hell. I mean, we've all seen that scene out of Predator 2 where he locks hands and bulging muscles come out. So he's like a big, intimidating guy. And I think he is probably the perfect choice for this particular Terminator. I mean, I would personally be afraid. Would you be afraid if Arnold Schwarzenegger came out and was just like, "Are you Adam Connor?"
If 1980s Arnold Schwarzenegger approached me with the look on his face that he does in this film, I'd be absolutely crapping my pants. There is the very funny thing about the logic of it doesn't make sense because the Terminators are meant to be like infiltration units. I'm sorry, 1980s Arnold Schwarzenegger really stands out. You're going to probably notice him, but what I think really works about this film is that doesn't matter to me. That kind of like plot hole, really, I couldn't care less because I think he embodies it so perfectly. Just as you said, in the mannerisms, the way he walks, like the way he moves, even like his head. Like I think he did a lot of training with using guns and firearms because even the way he does that, he just manages to keep that such a blank, neutral expression on his face like a machine would, in a way that a human being is going to probably show some kind of emotion in a situation like that. So it was a purely perfect piece of casting. Interestingly, you might know this, Hatsu, but just in case members of the audience don't. Originally, Arnie was down to play Kyle Reese, the main hero, alongside Sarah Connor in this film. James Cameron was very against that idea, and in his first meeting with Arnie, he was determined that he was going to get Arnie to like back down from this role, so he planned to have a fight with him and just to like kind of piss him off so he would go away. But he actually got talking to him and he actually really liked Arnie, and they developed I think they still have a lasting friendship. I think they're still very good friends, but they kind of both sort of found themselves gravitating more towards the Terminator role, and that's where James Cameron had a thought and be like, I think he could be great, at this role. I mean, there's that it's funny in one sense, but not funny in another sense. O.J. Simpson was somebody who was touted to play the Terminator originally. For those who don't know, O.J. Simpson was a very famous running back in the NFL in the 70s, I believe, and became very infamous in the 90s for being accused of killing his ex-wife and her boyfriend in a very kind of famous trial and very dubious, but we're going to get into that in this episode. But at the time, James Cameron didn't want him because he said didn't think OJ would make a convincing killer. One of these very sort of, dark comedy moments.
Age like milk comments, essentially.
Age like milk in the sun, really, that one. Yeah, but like it's a complete perfect piece of casting. And since we're on the topic of character, what do you think about the rest of the kind of main cast of this film? We've got I always say Michael Biehn. I'm not sure if it's Michael Biehn, but do you know which way it's meant to be?
No.
Let's say, well, you say however you want, and I'll say however I want. We'll compromise there. But we've got Michael Biehn, who plays Kyle Reese, the soldier who's sent back from the future to protect Sarah Connor, and then we have Linda Hamilton playing Sarah Connor herself. What do you think about Linda Hamilton and Michael Biehn in this film? How do you think they do?
I think they both do fantastically, to be honest, because I'm going to be honest, maybe I'm taking too much of like a modern approach to this, but it could have been so easy to have Linda Hamilton as this kind of damsel in distress, because there's a very fine line when it comes to action films like this, and it's something that a lot of 80s and 90s action films fell into the trap of, where, and I know I said it's a sci-fi, but come on, sci-fi action, there's this trope where you've got to have the muscular male hero and you've got to have the screaming lady at his side, and she can't do anything except get kidnapped by the villain, or like quite helpless while the guy has to go and do things. And at the same time, for this one, I think she is like she plays the character perfectly. I'm going to say this, she plays the character absolutely perfectly. As this woman who is living through the 1980s, she's just living her life, and then this weird man in a stolen trench coat comes up to her, probably a smelly trench coat because he stole it, but he comes up to her and he says, there's a robot that's sent from the future, it's trying to kill you because your name's Sarah Connor. Now, don't get me wrong, if I was told that regularly, if someone said there's a robot from the future trying to kill you, you would be weirded out by the guy telling you this, not the other way about. You would be like, oh my god, let's go. She doesn't do that though. That's the thing. She doesn't say, oh yay, okay, I'm getting chased by a robot, let's go. It's just very realistic the way she reacts to things. She sees the Terminator, she's scared, she's vulnerable. At the same time though, she is like really strong-willed. She fights back. She, correct me if I'm wrong, but does she help like throw bombs out of the truck, or is it her running down to distract the Terminator?
Yeah, she helps make them, and then she ends up driving the car when I think it's just Kyle who kind of lobs them towards the end of the film where they're being chased by T-800. Yeah, it's Kyle lobbing them out. But yeah, as you say, she's the. I've always thought funny. Like I always thought, all right, he's like run quickly as the Terminator's basically got into this like giant fuel tanker chasing them down. And he's like run quickly, so he jumps into this like dumpster. And the Terminator just drives past the dumpster, just like starts chasing down Sarah Connor. I'm like, that's very brave of you, Kyle. For like the woman that you had one job, which is to protect Sarah Connor, and you left her in like literally the most vulnerable situation here. But yeah, as you say, like she gets this. There's that particular bit at the end after the Terminator has been basically reduced down to its metal exoskeleton. Which can I say, by the way, the T-800 is a pretty terrifying design. I find this incarnation of it in Terminator to be the most scary, the most terrifying. I think a lot of that comes from this kind of stop motion. I don't know. I find stop motion quite freaky and quite scary, so I don't know, maybe you don't feel the same way, but I find this particular version of Terminator when it's chasing them through the kind of like factory to be incredibly terrifying. As her and Kyle are trying to get away, Kyle's been quite badly injured by Terminator, and he's kind of just like looks like he's about to give up, and then Sarah kind of just grabs him by the lapels and is just like, move it on your feet, soldier. And it's the kind of start of what that character will become, especially in the next film. I think Linda Hamilton does a very good job of developing that character over the 100 minutes of the runtime. What about Michael Biehn? How do you feel about him?
I think he does a good job, and he does that sense of desperation really well. As you said, there's a scene where they get arrested by the police because of everything going on. He's like begging them, he's desperate, he's saying, oh, we're all going to die and everything. And they, of course, they laugh it off, because why would you believe someone who says they are quote unquote from the future, who's going to save humanity? But then, obviously, the famous scene of I'll be back, and then he drives into the police station, the Terminator drives into the police station, blows away everybody in his path. It's just like such a fantastic sequence. But I do think Michael Biehn, he just does a fantastic job, I think, of trying to be this protector, but at the same time realising he's out of his depth. Because would you agree with this? Would you say that a lot of films, maybe not modern films, but kind of recent films anyway, they have this thing where they have the trope of the savvy time traveler?
Yeah, I exactly know what you mean. Like one who's like, he's kind of au fait with the time periods he's jumping into completely, while Kyle is anything but that.
Like, he has no idea about this future. He only knows about it from what John Connors told him. And I think that's fantastic, because obviously you're not going to have many history books, I'm assuming, in like this world that's been ripped apart by Terminators. So the only real historical information you're getting is, and I'm going to put on my history nerd glasses here, you're only going to get like oral primary sources here. You're only going to get like very biased sources where maybe there'll be a kind of hint of romanticization from John to say, oh, in this time before the dystopian hellhole that they're in just now, it's everything that John is telling him. Am I right in saying that Kyle was born in this world?
Yeah, he made the point that he was born after Judgment Day.
Yeah, he has no idea about what this kind of world could have been, because it's not really, you know how we look at history, where we both look back on it and we kind of compare it to where we are now, and we think, okay, there's like a development going on there. For these people, and by that I mean like Kyle Reese and anyone in the future, that has always been their life. So to go back into a world where there's humans everywhere, there's no Skynet, I think he does a great job. I honestly think the actor does an absolutely fantastic job of portraying that. But sorry, just before we go on, you've actually got a claim to fame with this actor, don't you?
A very embarrassing, let's say a very embarrassing like story with. Yes, I met Michael Biehn at a Comic-Con in Glasgow. Maybe one of the most nervous I've ever felt in my life when I was standing in the queue going up to meet him, just because I love this film so much. I really love Carl Louis' character, and I really like Aliens as well. That's probably Michael Biehn's other biggest film, I would say. So yeah, so I came to meet him, and he was very nice because he was obviously quite tired. It was getting towards the end of the day, so I think he maybe had enough. But he was a nice guy. But yeah, I stood there and embarrassed myself as I was like, I really like the Terminator. It's one of my favorite films. I'm sitting there, poor guy's just been like, oh my god, like, get this nerd out of my face right now. But yes, I did meet Michael Biehn, and I did embarrass myself in front of him. My eternal shame.
Come with me if you want to cringe.
That was literally the title to my encounter with him.
I actually remember that one because I was standing in the distance, and I actually didn't think there was anything wrong until you shimmied back over. You're like, yeah, no, this is. It's like, no, we need to go now.
Speak of this again.
But don't you want to see the Tommy Cooper Doctor Who cosplays? Like, no, I want to go home.
At least I got his autograph out of it, so there we go. I think he wrote the "Come with me if you want to live" line on it as well. So there we go. I don't actually wrap it. I need to go dig my autograph out. But yes, do you know it's funny with Michael Biehn in this film? He said he was a very nice guy when I met him. And I don't mean to be mean to the guy. Like, I don't think he's the greatest actor of all time. I think, to be honest, I think he was limited. I think he is limited as an actor. But that being said, I think that limitation actually works really well for this film. And it's for all the reasons that you've just detailed. I think wooden delivery is too strong because it's not that bad, but the not completely natural delivery of a more talented actor, it really works for making this character who feels really out of place and is from a very different world and doesn't really quite know how to act in this world and doesn't really seem to want to know in a way. Like, I always think it's interesting that he never really seems particularly fascinated with things about this world. He is, if anything, just as mission focused as the Terminator is. You know, he's almost become machine-like in his own way. And I actually think Michael Biehn does a really good job at portraying that. And I don't know if it was deliberate. I mean, maybe it was. Maybe I'm not giving him enough credit. But, you know, whether it was deliberate or not, I think Michael Biehn does a really good job of bringing this character to life and bringing that across as somebody who is just out of touch, out of step from a completely different world and time. And I think that also really helps that scene that we were talking about earlier when his squad mate is like disintegrated by the... I don't know, actually, this is how terrible a fan I am. I don't actually know if there's a proper name for those kind of big tank things, but I'll just call them the tanks. When they're disintegrated and he just does that kind of just like close, and it's just like, oh, not another one. I think Michael Biehn does a great job of just portraying that character. So I think he's actually perfect for this film, whether, like, you know, it was all deliberate acting or whether it's just maybe to do with his slight lack of complete acting ability. And I'm sorry if Michael Biehn ever listens to this, I'm really sorry. Like, thank you for being so nice when I met you, and I'm really sorry that I've made it seem like you're a terrible actor, because you're not a terrible actor. I love Terminator, I love Aliens, and, you know, I think you're great in both of them. I'll take the blame if Michael Biehn comes after us from slamming his ability. So just before we wrap up and move on to the next film, as one last point, this film has a very different feel to the others, in my opinion, and I feel like it's basically kind of a horror film in many ways, almost like a horror slasher film. First of all, do you agree with that? And number two, what do you think about that? Do you like the fact that it's slightly more different tone and genre to others in the series, or do you prefer more the way that the Terminator series moved more into the action genre? Do you prefer that?
No, I would absolutely agree with that. I think that Terminator definitely has a different feel to, like, completely to the other ones, even to Terminator 2. And I think the best example of this is probably if you compare it to something like Alien. So Alien 1 was very much this horror film where, as you may know, there's an alien aboard, like a spaceship, it's stalking the crew, and one by one they're getting picked off. And much like Alien, Terminator is a film about this robot from the future that is hunting down Sarah Connor and killing anyone and everyone in his way until he gets what he wants. Absolutely fantastically done. And there is that sense of horror. Watching, like, all the films back to back, because I'm a psycho, I watched all of these films back to back over a couple of days. I think this is where the T-800 personally is its strongest and its most intimidating, because, as we said before, the Terminator, what is it that Kyle Reese says? The Terminator doesn't sleep, it doesn't eat, it just keeps going.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
That's the only time you really see that side of the Terminator, especially the T-800s, because later on they recycle the formula of, oh look, it's another Terminator, oh it's evil and it's got a couple of, like, fancy gadgets. while it was something novel there, it's not really that great when you keep repeating that formula over and over and over again. And the Terminator that you grew up with, watching being this absolutely murderous, horrifying machine, just suddenly turns into like comic relief, or, oh look, I know that guy from Terminator, as you point to the CGI husk of Arnie in Terminator Salvation or in Genesis or other films. You think, really? I don't know, like, would you agree with that this is probably the scariest the Terminator films get with portraying the Terminators? Because don't get me wrong, T2 does have its scary moments, but I feel as if the levity of a lot of the situations do kind of outweigh it.
No, I completely agree. Especially for your kind of, I don't want to say like your standard Terminators, but this kind of model of the Terminators becomes the more kind of standard one that we see. We see quite a few of them in the opening of Terminator 2, but as you say, they never have that fear factor that they do in the first one, because I think it is the kind of man versus machine quality. And I think the minute that other Terminator films started adding basically a lot of the time machine versus machine, it's not as terrifying, even though the T-1000 is terrifying and scary in a lot of different ways because it's fighting, a T-800. It's not the same as when it's like T-humans desperately trying to do anything they can to like hide or just slow down this like relentless machine. And yeah, so no, I'd completely agree that this, I think, is the scariest the Terminator films got. It doesn't seem like they want to kind of go back to this, or if they do, they don't want to like fully commit to going back to this way. So yeah, I don't think we'll ever see another Terminator film like this, honestly.
And again, sorry, I know I'm prolonging the inevitable. Ironically enough, I'm prolonging our judgment on Judgment Day, but yeah, they never really go back to that, and it's weird because that's the thing that made this franchise so famous and popular. And just one more point before we move on, though, because as you said, it's almost as if they normalise the T-800s, isn't it? They like make them the standard model. If that was the case, though, then what would stop them from just sending a whole bunch of them back? Because I know, obviously, if you think about this film too much, like the time travel part of it, you kind of think, hold on, I don't know if that makes sense or this makes sense. But the fact that they only sent one, and a machine that's only programmed to think logically believes that they can do the job with just one Terminator, because if they thought that they could kill Sarah Connor or they were going to have difficulty, then they would have sent more than one. And I know from a technical perspective that's because James Cameron wanted to have the T-1000 in the first Terminator film. Did you know that?
Yeah, I saw some stuff saying he'd hoped to put it in.
See, in all honesty, I think that would have ruined the film.
Completely agree. Just thinking about 80s technology, and I think that seemed to be, from what I read, the reason that he didn't decide to go ahead with it. But if we think about kind of 80s technology, that would have aged very badly. So I completely agree with. I think it was a great decision to scrap that.
But yeah, sorry, that's my final point, I swear.
Can I sum up for both of us? And again, tell me if I'm being unfair, but I think we like this film.
Just a tad.
Just a tad. I think we like this film a lot. Again, I think you said this right at the beginning, and I'll just co-sign again. I do. I mean, effects aside, I do think this film really holds up even today. Would you agree with that? Would you?
Oh, absolutely. As I said, the only thing that doesn't hold up in this film are the effects. But honestly, there's not many films at the time. There are a few, there's that fair few that you think, how did they get those effects in? How did they get that particular shot and things like that? See, for the time and the absolute dedication for this film, like one of the facts I read about this as well was that you're going to hate me for this, Adam, but James Cameron went to the James Nguyen School of Filming. Did you know this?
My God.
I don't know if this is the official term, but it was like guerrilla filming, where he would film in a location in secret and then run away.
Oh, is this for the final shot?
There was that as well, yeah.
For like when Sarah Connor's driving down. You mentioned how much you love the intro. Can I just briefly state how much I love the outro? The end of this film I think is amazing with Sarah Connor like in Mexico and then being like, there's a storm coming, and I know, and just start driving into it. I love that. But sorry, that was a tangent. But I heard that bit was, as you say, guerrilla film. Were there other bits?
I think there was some in the streets, but I don't quite know which bits. But there's definitely other bits, I'm sure, where they just had to film and then run away before the police showed up. And I thought, wow, I wonder where James Nguyen got that for Birdemic.
My God. Maybe I'm too harsh on James Nguyen for that.
He was a visionary. You did not understand.
No, it's true. I didn't understand the appeal of diagonal camera angles.
Then again, I don't think anyone understood that film. Moving on, though. Sorry.
You just had to bring, but you couldn't help yourself. We couldn't just have nice things. We couldn't just talk about films that we liked. You had to bring Birdemic into it.
It's season 3, okay?
This is called a callback, I believe.
It's like that old meme. I can't believe you've done this.
God. Please don't make me watch that film. Is there anything else you want to say about the Terminator before we move on?
Honestly, I would say this is probably, if not one of the best, probably the best in the franchise in terms of their pacing, characterization, and the only thing that lets it down is really the effects. Like, I would go as far to say this is near enough a perfect film in terms of every single story beat. Come at me. For all those Salvation fans, all one of you. Come at me, bro.
You talking about me there? Me, the one.
Yeah, oh yeah. Come at me, Adam.
I mean, I'm gonna just stop the charade. This is not only my favorite film of the series, this is my favorite film of all time. Again, just my personal opinion, I think this film was perfect. Watching it again, I tried to see if I could find something that I thought, like, well, maybe that's not perfect, and the effects are the only thing that are close, but even then, I can't dock it for the effects, because I'm just like, it's mid-80s, it's low budget, I really don't think they're in it long enough to really detract from it. This film is perfect to me. If you haven't seen it, I'd highly recommend go watching it. If you have seen it, go watch it again. It's still great. It still stands out. So The Terminator proved to be both a commercial and a critical success, and the film studio was keen for work on a sequel to begin as soon as possible. However, disputes between Helmdale Film Corporation, which partially owned the rights to Terminator, disputes between them and Cameron and Schwarzenegger stalled any further progress on making a sequel. However, this dispute was resolved in 1990 when Helmdale were bought out for their rights, and production of Terminator 2 began almost immediately. While the first film had a budget of $6.4 million, Terminator 2 had an estimated budget of $94 to $102 million. Just a little bit more, and this made it the most expensive film ever made at the time, and it was released on the 3rd of July 1991. I'll tell you what, I won't be harsh, Satsu. You did such an excellent job with this plot synopsis to Terminator that I will take over and I'll give a brief plot synopsis to Terminator 2.
Godspeed.
So we flash forward to 1995. Sarah Connor has been captured by the police. She is now committed to a mental institution, and her son, who's now born John Connor, has been taken away from her and is basically now being raised by foster parents. John is a bit of a delinquent, if we're honest here, always getting into trouble and is kind of aimless and, anger at his mum for feeling like she lied to him about, what his future was going to be and what his destiny was. In the meantime, though, Skynet sends back another Terminator, this time the T-1000, to take out John while he's a kid and again ensure Skynet's victory in its war against humanity. The T-1000 this time is made of a kind of liquid metal alloy, which allows it to not only turn itself into knives and other stabbing weapons, but also to imitate other human beings and even disguise itself in kind of floors, things like that. So to counter this, the Resistance sends back another fighter to protect John and ensure his survival. But rather than sending a human, this time they decide to send their own Terminator, which they've reprogrammed and turned to the good side to protect John and to hopefully defeat the T-1000. This turns out to be a T-800, very similar to the model that was sent back in 1984 to kill Sarah Connor. After John links up with the T-800, he decides to rescue his mother, break her out of the mental institution, and the three of them then are forced to both try and evade the efforts of the T-1000 to find and eliminate them, but also they begin to uncover more about how Skynet is formed, and they learn that the origins of Skynet are being developed currently by a company called Cyberdyne and by a man called Miles Dyson. Sarah Connor takes it on herself and decides that the best way to prevent Judgment Day is to eliminate Miles Dyson. However, John and the T-800 dissuade her from that, and they begin to form an alternate plan to see if they can halt Miles's work and prevent Skynet from ever being formed, all while the T-1000 continues to track them down. This was the first Terminator film that you saw. First of all, what's your kind of general feeling on this film? And if you do like it, what are the things that you particularly like about it?
So I saw this film, again, as I said, I think the first time I saw this film was like on the TV when they were rerunning it 1,000 times, and I remember watching it, I was really hooked by the intro because they start off again in the future, but maybe I'm going to get a wee bit controversial for my takes in this film, but I feel as if this is when they started. I'm not saying it was bad in this film because this was the first time they did these tropes and things, but I feel as if this is when they started all these tropes. Like, this was basically the ground zero for the narration over Judgment Day, the narrations over the future landscapes and things, because as we said before, the first film does such a great job of telling you nothing, just showing you this dystopian wasteland where all these machines are crawling over like skulls and things. And then in Terminator 2, although it's well done in that film, you get the whole, in the future, they try to kill me, my name is John Connor, and you're like, oh god. But they don't do it in this film, they do it a bit more upbeat, but that's the kind of precedent they set to go forward with the films. And there's a lot of other things, like making the T-800 into more of a comedic character, which I know we'll get on to. The gimmicks as well for the rival Terminator, like, don't get me wrong, the T-1000 is really cool, and the effects, I'll actually get onto that, because this is a film that famously people say, oh, the effects hold up really well. All I'll say is, don't watch this film on Blu-ray with hyped up graphics, because I'm going to be honest, some of the T-1000 scenes did not hold up very well when I was rewatching, and I was like, you know the scene where they're in the mental asylum and he goes through the bars, like, that's really well done. But then other scenes where it's like he's a puddle when he's coming up, like, it still looks great, but you could still tell it's CGI, you know, and I don't want to harp on it too much, but yeah, I feel as if with this one, as I said, the gimmicky Terminators make their debut here, where they have to have like a superpower, as it were. I know it's like an ability or whatever, but they have to have a power that supersedes the T-800, because that's what the amazing thing about the first one was. The fact that the T-800 was just a robot, you know, stomping around and trying to kill Sarah Connor, but this one can morph into anything, can copy things, and that is a cool concept, don't get me wrong, I love it, but, you know, where were these things? I'm going to be honest, see if the future Skynet had like T-1000s running around, or TXs or whatever, where the hell were they? Like, I know from a technical level they hadn't been written yet, but yeah, it kind of prods a kind of big plot hole, don't you think?
You're completely right. It is like, maybe you should have sent this one first. Or even, you know, even like the TX from the next film. Perhaps these should have been the ones they were sent. I mean, trying to think if they have done. I've seen some games and things that have like tried to explain it a little bit more, but you're right. It is a bit of a plot hole, let's be honest.
Again, that's nitpicking, because I don't want to be one of these people that say, oh, the film is ruined for me because they didn't send the T-1000 first and all of this, because otherwise obviously wouldn't have Terminator. Yeah, it doesn't ruin the film for me or my enjoyment of the film. I genuinely think it's a fantastic film regardless. Terminator, I think as a whole, even for the first one, is one of these films that if you think about the time travel too much, you are gonna drive yourself crazy. I'm gonna bring up a point, and I don't know if this is explained in like one of the Wikipedia pages or something, but I'm correct in saying, aren't I, that Terminators, to go back in time, or for anyone to go back in time, they need like flesh on them.
Yes, you're correct.
So they need like a fleshy exterior. So my question is, it made sense for the TX, it made sense for the T-800. What's the reason for the T-1000? Because although he is like cloaked in that kind of material, does that just get absorbed into him?
Huh.
Because, you know, like, it goes into, like, a puddle of, I don't know, nanobots or whatever, or, like, just a puddle. And as cool as it is...
Doesn't exactly have a skeleton. That's a good point.
Where's your skin?
That's a very good question. Maybe they refined the time travel briefly and then forgot how to do it.
Oh, yeah, that one time.
That one time they were like, damn, we cracked it. Like, oh, now we've lost it again.
Can you imagine being a scientist for Skynet? That would be amazing. I want to see a film like that, where it's just all the incompetent robot scientists trying to work out time travel.
Figure out, my god, robot Einstein.
Can you imagine that, though? It's like the robot saying, sir, it's a success. We've got this T-1000 model. Then why the hell didn't you send him first? Quick, send him back. Wait a minute, where's his skin? It's like, you've had this the whole time. And, they have to destroy it because they don't want to get embarrassed. So, like, okay, now they have to go back with skin.
Can I just say, I really want to see this now. I want to see, like, the Skynet scientist. It reminds me, there's a great little, like, bit in, I think it's the second Shadow of Mordor. It's that Shadow of War, that game set in the kind of Lord of the Rings universe, where, like, you come across, I think at one point, like, some orc builders, and they're, like, busy trying to argue them. They're like, yes, you know what? Building is just as important as being a warrior. Like, and they're trying to convince themselves. And I really want to see that with the Skynet scientist being like, yes, building the T-1000 is just as important as being out on the front lines and wiping out humanity. Where are the real heroes? I just really want to see that now.
Here's another question, completely off topic, but this is me nitpicking. Like, I don't want to give anyone an impression that I don't like this film, because I really do, but I was actually asking you this, and you said it was horrifying. You know how Terminators, or as we said, it has to be organic beings that go through, or people cloaked in skin and organic materials. What if you wrapped a gun in skin? And I said this to you, and you said that would be horrifying. And I was like, you're right, for the humans, that would be horrifying, wrapping a gun in skin. What's to stop the Terminators from doing that?
There's no reason, but once again, can I just say that's horrifying? Also, but what if you wrapped it? What if you wrapped it in, like, bacon? Would that work?
Oh my god.
Does bacon count as, like, just raw bacon? I mean, holding raw bacon is also not particularly great, but I think I would take that over, like, human flesh, to be honest.
Do you know what I'm laughing at now? Back to our sitcom, Skynet Scientists here. The fact that there's a T-800 out there that's just wrapped in bacon. And, like, the motherboard or whatever's controlling them is just like, what the hell is this? Jim 1000? What the hell is this? He's like, it's wrapped in organic material. It's like, I can see that. Why is it bacon? Why is it cooking? His servers are literally cooking the bacon.
That was like the T100, because I think they talk about the T600 being, like, really rubbery. Before the T600, there was a T100 or T200, like, covered in bacon. They just really worked their way up. I love it.
What does the T stand for? Toaster.
Toasters will lead the charge when the machines rise.
Oh, can you imagine just an angry toaster they send back instead?
I really don't want it. It sounds terrifying. It's like one of those terrible, like, 80s slasher type films.
Sorry, I know we've, like, gone on a massive tangent here, but I swear there's a point to it. That actually the whole point was for Netflix to pick up our show, Skynet Scientists. Netflix, you got my number if you want to call. But yeah, sorry, going back to Terminator 2.
I mean, I don't know where I can go after this. I feel like anything I say was disappointment, but yeah, like, this for a while was my favourite Terminator. I mean, I feel like this probably is, if people were to pick a favourite film of the series, I feel like this is the one that would probably get the most votes. And I can see why. Like, I think as a film, it's incredibly polished. You instantly get a sense of how, on a bigger budget and a bigger scale this film is. And, like, as much as I'm not a fan of, like, the kind of future stuff being more like a kind of conventional war, I do think, like, the scale, and when you see, like, the number of extras and the kind of big battle scenes, it is very impressive. Don't get me wrong. And so, like, I think this whole film is incredibly polished, as I say, and I think it's very well structured, well put together. I think the story beats are great. The acting, I think, is good, though we'll come on to that. This is very much more an action film. And do you know what? I think you made such an interesting point when you talked about this being, like, the ground zero film for what the Terminator series would become. And everything you said was completely right in talking about the kind of shift towards action, the gimmicky nature of the Terminator adversaries, the kind of transformation of the T-800, and kind of Arnie's character into, like, a heroic kind of comedic figure. It's all in this film. It's just that this film did it really, really well, while later films didn't. What are your general feelings on the shift into action? Do you think it was a good idea for this film to become, like, more of an action film? Or would you have liked to have seen it kind of retain that sort of horror, kind of slasher vibe of the original?
I mean, going back to one of the comparisons I made earlier about, like, comparing this film to something like the Alien franchise, Alien 1, much like Terminator 1, is very grounded in, like, horror and, like, stalking your victim and trying to get them with the alien or the Terminator, as it were. Whereas Aliens and Terminator 2 are more action oriented. You've got the big guns, you've got, spoilers for Aliens, but you've got the big, like, mech fight scene at the end, so you've got the big fight scenes in this, and don't get me wrong, the action is incredible. As an action film, I think this is superb. it does a lot of things well, but going as a Terminator film, because it is something that was very, and again, I don't want to like downplay the significance of Terminator 2, but it was something that was quite common. Correct me if I'm wrong, but do you think it was something that was quite common for a lot of these films, that it started off as like a horror film for certain film franchises and then it moved into more actiony stuff?
You're right, I think that's quite a trend for a lot of these things. I mean, Aliens is obviously the best example of that, and Aliens was directed by James Cameron. You know, and obviously that is very much an action film, as we say. But even thinking about a lot of kind of horror franchises, I wouldn't say a lot of them became action films, but they certainly develop a lot more kind of actiony elements. Like thinking about things like Friday the 13th, Halloween, and films like that. There's a much bigger focus on action, it seems, as a kind of franchise goes on. Even to be honest, not that like I'm trying to compare this series to like the Terminator, but even like Fast and Furious, which is very much a kind of street racing film, has now become really big kind of action. It's a really big action franchise now. It almost seems like it's a logical progression. If your series goes on for long enough, it kind of falls into the action genre. But yeah, like, I mean, I agree as well. Like, again, obviously, I'm with you. I prefer the kind of horror vibe and slasher vibe of the original. And I think this did set a trend that became a problem for this series. I don't think we can argue against that and we can deny it. Like, I think we have to recognize this film did set a lot of bad things in motion. Sort of like you might argue something like Call of Duty 4 did as well. It just happened to do these things so well that we kind of forgive it for that. But I think it made sense to transition, because I'm not sure, just looking at the two films, it's kind of nice that they have their own kind of different identities. And I think as two films, that works well. It's nice to have them both be different things. It's nice that Terminator 2 wasn't just like a kind of straight pastiche or copy of the original. It's just a shame that we can foresee the future and we know what's coming after this.
Going back to what you were saying there, it is definitely, you're 100% right. It's a film with its own identity, and I think that is something that this film desperately needed after the success of the first one. Going back to, I'm going to lift a quote from another famous film, Dark Knight, where they say, you know the iconic line I'm going to say, you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. I feel as if Terminator is one of those franchises that fits into that, because as we said, the first one, very dark, horror, gritty. Then we get to the second one, which completely goes in the opposite direction. There's a lot more moments of levity. Compared to the first one, there was barely any kind of joking moments or moments of peace, really. On the one hand, that was a great move by James Cameron and everyone involved, because it meant that they could explore like more of the future, they could explore other aspects of this like wider world, and I think that's a really interesting idea. But then you look at the other films, like as I said, you've got Terminator 3, where you've got the female Terminator that has like a built-in gun, which I completely forgot about. Can I just say, before rewatching, I was like, oh yeah, she's got a portable flamethrower. You've got Terminator Salvation, where they do the whole, my name's John Connor, very serious and dark. And yeah, I feel as if because Terminator 2 was so successful, and don't get me wrong, there's so many good action scenes. There's a scene where they're getting chased down the, like, you know, the valley bit by the big truck, and he's on the motorbike. You've got the chase scene, you've got the sequence of Arnie shooting. Okay, I'm going to ask you something quickly just before I go on, but do you feel, see, going back and watching the first Terminator and then watching this one, do you find it weird that the T-800 isn't lethal, to put it nicely?
It makes sense later on, because obviously John Connor like expressly or forbids it from killing, you know, that kind of makes sense. But you're right, before that it does show like a unwillingness to take people out. And if you think about when it first arrives and it enters the bar, you know, the famous, I need your clothes, your boots, your motorcycle. If that was a T-800 from Terminator 1, it would have like ripped out all the bikers' hearts, like, without even thinking about it. But this time it, like, you know, I know it throws the guy on the stove and everything, and like it does like break a guy's arm and stab him and everything, but it doesn't kill anybody, even the guy who comes out with a shotgun and threatens it. So there is like an element of that does, like, as you say, completely detract from its apparent lethality. And as well, I think it's a shame as well, because I think the film has an interesting opening thing in that obviously we saw Arnie as the bad character in the first film, but then we have Robert Patrick's T-1000. We don't know, not that we know it's a T-1000 to begin with, but we have both of them arriving back. And I think the film could have done something more interesting about who is the bad guy here. Before I seen this film, I kind of knew that Arnie was the good guy in the second film. I kind of knew that. So perhaps if I didn't know that, I might have been a bit more wondering. But just thinking the fact that he doesn't kill those bikers and everything kind of signals that he's the good Terminator in this one. And I would have liked the film to have played a bit more with that until like the very last minute, you know, when John is in that hallway and he's running away and the T-1000's at one side and the T-800's at the other. And like, it would have been great if we had just no clue at that minute who's on what side. If Robert Patrick's character even is a Terminator, you know, I think that could have been really great. But the film, I think, kind of undercuts that.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but is it correct that the marketing for this film also spoiled it?
You could be right there. That does sound like something that probably would have happened.
That is something I have heard other critics say, and myself included. I was going to bring that point up as well, because it's completely like, if you watch this film for the first time, you had no idea that he was supposed to be the bad guy, you would 100% believe that the T-1000 was a good guy and Arnie was the villain again. But yeah, that scene in the hallway is just so, it's so iconic. He's got a walking pun. I take it you know what the pun is I'm going to mention.
I think I know.
Literal Guns N' Roses. As he pulls out, you know, he blasts the T-1000 and you realise, oh my god, the police officer's actually a robot and, you know, they have to run away. I feel as if it would have been better, but being someone who, obviously, I was born in the 90s, but I wasn't old enough to see this film, definitely not old enough to see it, and I was born probably after, is it right in saying this came out in 1991?
Yes, 1991, so before both of us were born.
We wouldn't have seen this in the cinema, and we obviously wouldn't have been old enough to see it in kind of repeat viewings, but I totally see what you mean. I think that it would have served the film better if it was kept a mystery. But then again, that's the thing with this film, it's so popular and it's such like a cornerstone of films as a whole that, I mean, it's like knowing the Darth Vader twist. You can't really hide that anymore, no more than you can hide the twist in this film. Whenever people think about Terminator 2, I mean, they think about Arnie, don't get me wrong, but they think more about the T-1000. And when you think about the T-1000, you know he's the villain. So as soon as you see him, you're like, is that the T-1000? Is he the T-1000? So I just wanted to say I completely agree with you on that point.
No, it's really good, and as you say, like, it is just an ingrained part of popular culture now. You know, you're completely right. We think of the T-1000, you know, instantly as this like very villainous, malevolent presence, and but you know, if we think about Arnie, we think about like "Hasta la vista, baby" and everything. Which, you know, good guys have these kind of lines. That's not like a bad. You can't imagine the T-1000 saying that. It's a shame that we're never going to get that. And, you know, you're probably right. And the marketing probably spoiled that to begin with. So it never really was like an element of the film. But it's a shame because I think it could have been a very interesting one. But I guess, you know, the demands of marketing and everything would probably have rendered that like null and void. But like, since we kind of talked a bit about the characters, what do you think about kind of Linda Hamilton in this film and like what she did to kind of develop the Sarah Connor character? And then also, what do you think about Edward Furlong, who plays John Connor in this film, and I believe this was his film debut? What do you think about those two?
Linda Hamilton, again, she's a completely different character compared to the first film. She's no longer this scared. Again, she's not a damsel in distress in the first one. She's just like this normal, scared woman who is running for her life and she learns to adapt very quickly, to be fair on her. In the second one, she takes more of like a kind of PTSD, scarred individual, really, and I think she does a fantastic job. The only thing, and I know I text you when I was rewatching this film, but the only thing I really don't like is there's a particular scene in the like psych ward. That's probably the biggest plot hole you could levy against this film, where Linda Hamilton gets arrested and she starts telling people about the Terminators, even though she saw what it did to Kyle Reese. He got arrested and he said, oh, they're going to kill us all, and then she's doing the exact same thing. It seems like a weird choice for her character to like openly say about the Terminators, but again, there's going to be a plot there. But the other thing I didn't like was the overly creepy orderly, and I think you came up with a good reason why that happened. But the fact that like she's meant to be drugged up and she's like tied to the bed for her own safety, and the orderly licks her, and I'm like, is that necessary?
I think it really is there so that when he gets like she beats him in the face with that broom, we're really like, yes, you deserve this. Like, are you not getting any sympathy from me at all? I really feel like it's there for that, if nothing else.
I think Linda Hamilton, she does a fantastic job. Edward Furlong, wrong, I have mixed feelings about him. Like, on the one hand, I think he plays the role really well, but there are times he can get very annoying, and I don't know whether that's just because he's clearly a product of the 90s to say, talk to the hand, hasta la vista, baby, and everything like that. Did you feel the same when you were rewatching this? Like, when he's teaching the Terminator the lingo of the time?
Again, I'm like you. I feel very conflicted about it. In the way that I said Michael Biehn, I think, was perfect for the role of like Kyle Reese. I do think in many ways Edward Furlong was perfect for this role. As you've said, like, I think he plays that kind of bratty delinquent teen, like youth, really well. He was really good at doing that. My problem isn't so much with him, my problem is with the kind of character they've devised. I don't know, like, it is that way, you're right. It does feel like so 90s, and it does just feel a bit corny at points. And what I will say is I do think Edward Furlong works very well with Arnie, and I do think the two of them actually have some very good scenes together. And it was going for, obviously, a more light-hearted... There is serious stuff in this film, don't get me wrong, but I feel like a lot of it revolves around Linda Hamilton, Sarah Connor, more than the other two, John Connor and the T-800. There is charm, and there is some fun to be had. John Connor trying to teach the T-800 to be more human and everything. It's not in the theatrical release. I think this is a scene from the extended version. But there's quite a funny scene where he's trying to get the T-800 to smile, and Arnie does a very good job of this. Like, I don't know if you've seen it at all, but it's quite a funny scene. I think some of it works, but you're right. Again, it kind of goes that way that it is undercutting a bit of the T-800's threat. I do think there is a kind of emotion with this, like, kid trying to find a father figure, you know, and trying to find some stability and kind of finding it in this robot. And there is something there, you know, that's a theme that's been present in films and science fiction for a long time and still is. So it's not exactly anything novel, but I do think the film does it, like, relatively well. So again, I'm conflicted about the John Connor character, I have to admit.
Speaking of the lingo, though, do you want to know a fun fact about a particular line in this film?
I'm always down for some fun facts, so hit me up with it.
As many long-time listeners of Chats and Anime may know, I am an absolute language nut. I love learning about different languages. I love meeting other people from other countries to talk about it. I'm basically like that version of heavy breathing guy at your window. As soon as I hear like the language, I'm like, I want to learn Spanish. Yeah, like the Duolingo, essentially. And I was talking to one of my friends who comes from a part in Spain called Galicia. I had to research this particular point because I thought there's no way this can be true, but apparently for some reason in the Spanish dub, so at the very end, one of the main lines to finish off the film is "Hasta la vista, baby," and that is one of the most iconic lines that came out of this film. Now, apparently in the Spanish dub, and this doesn't apply to Latin America, it's only Spain, they changed it to "Sayonara, baby," which I was like, that is very interesting. But even better. So, as I was saying, this friend comes from Galicia, and Galicia, much like other parts of Spain, have their own language and their own culture and everything. Did you know they got a dub as well that has their own version of Hasta la Vista?
Wow, I didn't know that. The storied history of this line.
If there's any Galicians out there who are a bit adverse to bad language in your own language, I apologise, and I apologise if I'm butchering this line. But the line they said was Arañana Raparigo, which essentially translates the general term as like F off boy or F off lad. But if you translate it through Google Translate, I got the term to scratch her boy. So I went back to my friend and I said, well, what does this mean? Apparently, Rañala, they essentially mean to go and scratch it. So like your nether regions down south. Fun fact. Instead of saying something quite innocent like hasta la vista, yeah, the Terminator tells the T-1000 to scratch his balls as he blows them up, or to F off.
That's the story of becoming human, isn't it?
Now I know why you cry.
Oh my god, I had so much more meaning to that line.
So yeah, that's your fun language fact of the episode.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Was quite amazing to hear. Actually, you're right. You're totally right in how interesting language is. Something that I think we should all pay more attention to and perhaps read a bit more out, because it is a fascinating. It's a completely fascinating thing. So thank you very much, Satsu, for educating us.
If you didn't know Galatian, well, go pick it up. It's not in Duolingo yet, but I'm sure it'll come eventually.
You cowards, put it on.
Put it on so we can watch the Galatian dub of this film.
We're just calling out Duolingo now. Oh my god, we're calling out everybody. I've insulted Michael Biehn's acting ability earlier on. You're calling out Duolingo. Oh my god.
Atari as well. We've got
Yeah,
to throw Atari in.
Atari. James Newen, you know what you did.
You know what? David Cage, get in here. Get in here, you son of a bitch. Get in here. For legal reasons throughout all of these names, this is a joke. This is the first time we're saying this in this season, but it is a joke. Anyway, sorry, Ad.
Oh, we got so long before we had to put a legal disclaimer in. Maybe we'll get through season 1 day without it.
I mean, to be fair, that is impressive for us.
Just before we kind of wrap up with the episode and everything, I just briefly wanted to touch on Linda Hamilton's portrayal of Sarah Connor. Her portrayal of Sarah Connor in this film is probably one of my favourite acting performances and one of my favourite characters in all of film. I think she does really well in the first film, but I think she just takes it to another level in this film. And like, I find her scenes to be the most like captivating in this whole film, when it's like the character that I still say identify, but I'm like drawn to the most. And I love her storyline about a woman who knows what's going to happen. It's like that Cassandra role. If she knows what's going to happen, but nobody's listening to her, nobody believes her, then she decides to take it on to herself to change the future. And in doing so, she actually becomes like what she's fighting against. She becomes like an emotionless robot as she basically tries to take out Miles Dyson, just sees him as a target, but can't quite do it because she realizes he is a human being, and she recaptures that humanity. And she plays off Edward Furlong's John Connor really well as well. Like, I think she does that great thing of like struggling to be like a mother, but also like a teacher and a drill sergeant in many ways, and prepare him for the future. I still choke up when right then, as sad as it is when John is like hugging the T-800 and being like, no, don't go. The bit that gets me is just the handshake between Sarah Connor and the T-800. Is this just like mutual sign of respect, because she has been incredibly, for obvious reasons, having gone through what she did in the first film, she's very mistrustful of the T-800 and really doesn't want it around. And there's quite a good scene in the extended version as well where she tries to like destroy it at one point, and John like stops her. And I think when you get that kind of like mutual respect between the two at the end, I think is really well done. And what do you think about the ending to this film, as a matter? Because some people call it corny and out of place, but I'm just interested to hear what you think about it.
Well, I also watched the extended cut of this, because all the scenes you're talking about there, I'm like, oh yep, so that one.
You know what I'm talking about, that's good.
Yeah, because I was actually going to bring that up there. Yeah, that is fantastic, that scene where they're supposed to take out, is it the chip or something out the Terminator?
It's like this neural processing chip or whatever they call it, like the thing that makes it learn.
And Sarah, like, just she goes to smash it to pieces, and they're like, oh, what? John Connor's just like, oh, what are you doing? And he stops her at the last minute. I feel as if that is such a natural reaction. If you were chased around in the first film by this thing, and then in the second film, you're supposed to like automatically trust it, and she doesn't automatically trust it, just as she didn't trust Kyle Reese when he came up and said, there's a robot after you, and she's like, nah, get away, and then she saw it. I just feel as if her reactions and everything are so natural. I felt as if that was great. But going back to your question there, when you talked about the ending, I'm mixed on it, because on the one hand, I know there's a deleted scene, correct me if I'm wrong, but
there was supposed to be that one where it was like an elderly Sarah Connor, a definitive end, but was taken out, and it's that kind of shot of the road basically driving by with like Sarah Connor's narration about feeling hope for the first time was put in.
But yeah, I remember, in video games where it's like, you got the good ending. I think it does it really well. It's one of these endings that I think wraps everything into a neat bow, if that makes sense. It wraps everything up. You think, okay, they stopped Judgment Day. And again, without going too deep into it, it really ticked me off when I was watching Terminator 3. And there's a particular line where John Connor's talking to the Terminator and he goes, oh, but we'd stopped Judgment Day. And then the Terminator goes, negative, we only delayed it or postponed it or something. And you think, well, what was the point? Oh, it really angered me, because I thought, well, the struggles, the, everything else in the second film, it was all for nothing, because this was so popular that it was going to become a franchise. It was going to be slapped on a Happy Meal. Like, can you imagine that? Having one of the T-1000 toys where it's like you press the back and just the metal spike comes out his hand.
I think we can probably say as well, part of the reason that I think Arnie got turned into a more sort of friendly and comic role for this film, not that it fully went that way yet, but it does feel like that was maybe an attempt to appeal to a younger audience as well, ever so slightly. With him, obviously he'd done more sort of comedic and heroic roles post the original Terminator, and so it does feel, but you're right, like it does feel like we're slightly moving towards that sort of happy mealization, if that's even a word, of the Terminator franchise.
Because don't get me wrong, like, I'll sound like a very harsh and depressing person to be like, oh, Terminator needs to be gritty, it needs to be, has to be all these things where no one's allowed to have fun. And don't get me wrong, this film does have its fun moments. moments, it has its great action set pieces and things like that. But when you have a Terminator that can't terminate, what do you call that then? Because he can't
An
terminate
eater.
anything. He's an eater, exactly. Yeah, he can't do his job. And I know he's reprogrammed. Can I just say, like, again, I've got no issues with pretending that X and Y is happening and believing the premise, essentially. I don't mind that. But sending a Terminator back seems like a very risky move, can I just say?
It feels like the kind of desperate move that like Skynet are supposed to be pulling off at this point, because like, the reason they're apparently sending these Terminators back is because they're on the verge of defeat. But like, it does feel like a very risky move on humanity's part. But I guess it's like, no time, quickly get that T-800 in there, it'll be fine. We'll work it out as we go along.
But they managed to reprogram and clothe and everything a T-800, like in skin. Surely they would have time to be like, no time, send in Jerry from accounting.
That'll be Terminator 20.
Your taxes are overdue.
It literally will be something like, you've been shredded, or something. It'll be something terrible like that.
You know, he just hits him with like a book and goes, these aren't in the books, bro. You know, I don't know. I'm not an accountant, okay?
You're in the red.
Count on me. You know, like all that rubbish. He's actually sounding more like a Smash Brothers
Literally
character.
is. Put Jerry in Smash. Put Jerry in accounting.
You and I were actually talking about this earlier, where you sent me a screenshot of, what was it? Was it Call of Duty?
Oh, yeah. We're at a auspicious time for doing a Terminator month, as Call of Duty Vanguard has introduced T-800 and the T-1000 skins from Terminator 2, obviously, into I'm not sure if it's Warzone or if it's like also Vanguard's multiplayer. I'm not entirely sure, I must admit.
I don't even know anymore, because it could be Warzone. I think maybe it's a bit of both, but honestly, I couldn't tell you nowadays, because there's so many variations on the skins now. Like, you've got anime characters, you've even got a dog warrior.
Just like my granddad told me about World War II.
What, you mean all the corgis, like, storming the beaches of Normandy?
Yeah, there was Gold Beach, Sword Beach, Corgi Beach.
What, fighting the German shepherds?
I love it. My God, let's make this alternate World War II.
Anyway, sorry, that's for another episode. What could make Call of Duty great? Let's add more dogs. Let's go the Call of Duty Ghost route. See, I had to put a jab in.
Screw you. I'm gonna say that line again. I'm just going through working down the list.
Yeah, Terminator has been introduced into Call of Duty. He's been introduced into Mortal. Is it Mortal Kombat? No, it's Injustice.
No, he's
isn't
in
it?
Mortal Kombat.
Or is
It's
it Mortal Kombat?
He's also been in the WWE games a few years
God.
back.
He's probably in Fortnite. I don't know 100%.
I feel like he
I'm
must be in
assuming.
Fortnite. I'd be surprised if it was not in Fortnite.
I mean, if Darth Vader fighting like Rick and Morty and all of that are in, and Thanos is there, the world's weirdest fanfic, if they're in it, the Terminator's probably in it. But going back to the original point I was making, it does feel as if they are commercialising the Terminator, if that makes sense. As you said, it feels as if they're trying to make him a lot more marketable and kind of, oh, look at me and my big smile, and I don't kill people, unlike the original one that did kill people. And it takes that grittiness and that kind of edge away from him, if that makes sense. And don't get me wrong, as I said, I'm not criticising this film and saying, oh, it's the worst thing ever. It's not, by far. It is not the worst film ever. But at the same time, there is definitely that, like, it's the primary stages of them trying to appeal to, like, a wider audience. Because in the 80s, I'm going to be honest, there was things like RoboCop where they tried to make it, or rather they tried to market it towards kids with their toys and things like that. Even though that film clearly is not for kids, I feel as if that was like the beginning of the end for Terminator. I'm going to go one step further, and this is probably quite controversial, or maybe it's lukewarm, I don't know, but I feel as if this was both simultaneously the beginning and the end for the Terminator franchise. It was the beginning in the sense that it was one of the greatest action films in history to ever grace the screen, but it was also the precursor for the other films that were to follow it. Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, Adam, because maybe I am 1,000% wrong here, but I feel as if all the other films just decided to copy Terminator 2, but they never decided to look at what made it great to begin with the first Terminator. Like all the tropes, all the one-liners, all the characters, characters, they all come from Terminator 2.
You're 100% right. This became the template for what every future Terminator film was trying to replicate. And a lot of that is because this film was enormously successful. It was like the highest grossing film of 1991. At the time, it was the third highest grossing film of all time. So, like, it's only natural in that sense that this would become the one that they try to replicate. But you're right. You're right in that none of the other films either couldn't capture it or didn't understand what made Terminator 2 so good. I mean, I'll push back ever so slightly, a very gentle nudge, because I do think that Terminator 3 had its own slight identity, and like it did try to do something different, but again, I've not seen that in a while, and perhaps by the time of our future episode I may have changed my opinion on that, but I do think that one, as much as I do think it is still it did try to copy Terminator 2 obviously, and it didn't succeed fully, I do still think it slightly did its own things. I'm going to give it slight props there, but I completely agree with the others that I think it seems that they were desperately trying to recapture that magic of Terminator 2. And as I said, it's understandable. I get it. Hollywood is a business after all. You know, it wants to copy successful, proven things. So can't really argue with it. It's just, it does feel like a shame that just became like the one thing about the Terminator film. It was like, we need to make this the big action film again. You know, they probably would have benefited from maybe doing their own, I mean, well, either from just ending the series or from maybe doing slightly different things. But yes, unfortunately, that was the future that lay ahead for this once great series. But is there any other points you want to bring up about Terminator 2?
All I'll say is, it is a fantastic action film. Like, I know I've been kind of ranting on it and poking fun at it and everything. I would say that everybody involved in it, actors-wise, writers-wise, and so forth, they all do a fantastic job. And I feel as if it does set the tone and really the stakes as well, you know, because there's that sense of desperation, like as you were talking about with Miles Dyson, who is this just innocent programmer who thinks he's going to change the world, and they have this really realistic way to continue the film because they use the arm from the first film that Sarah Connor crushed from the Terminator to basically try and boost what is it they're actually trying to create in Cyberdyne? Did they ever say?
I think it's like an advanced computer chip, I think is what he's working on, like an advanced kind of neural processor, you know, something that can like collate and collect and understand information at a heightened rate, you know, much faster than any human brain or previous kind of processor could, I think is what they're trying to create, and that's eventually what kind of leads to Skynet. Can I also quickly say as well, like, I want to just give us some small props to the actor Joe Morton who played Miles Dyson. He's not in the film for very long, but I think he's very good in the role, and it's a shame that character doesn't perhaps get more time, because I think it's an interesting character.
One of the things I think this film does well also is the fact that when the stakes have to get serious, they do up them. So for example, going back to Sarah Connor and the way Linda Hamilton portrays her, one of the things that I thought was really well done was the fact that, as you brought up earlier, the fact that she has almost become the Terminator. She's like so hyper fixated on achieving her goal, so much so that she's willing to kill a relatively innocent man. You know, he obviously is not doing it for malicious gains, but she's going to kill an innocent man just to save the future, but she's going to do that in front of his family. You know, there's no like tact, it sounds like a dinner party. It's like there's no grace, there's no decorum. It's just shooting your host in the face.
Where are the standards, damn it?
Back in my day, we sent a Terminator to finish the job. But I think that's really well done. And I totally agree. I think he's such a well done character, especially like the way he goes out and that desperation for him to hold the explosive. I thought that was a nice and very touching scene where he's panting heavy and he says, "Oh, I don't know how long I can hold this." And he's, you know, very panicked and everything. And even to his last breath, he's trying to do something to benefit humanity. You know, he doesn't just automatically blow up the police officers. So yeah, no, he's a great character. And I feel as if, even though like there's certain characters I said, "Oh, I don't know," I feel as if everyone plays their roles really well. And yeah, I think this is a fantastic action film. In terms of comparing to the first one, I still would say that the first one's probably better in terms of like pacing and characterization and that kind of thing. But this is a classic, and it's a classic for a reason, because it is just such a fantastic entry into the action genre.
I couldn't agree more. Like, this is one of the best action films of all time, and it's a great film. Again, I feel it's endlessly rewatchable as well, like the first one, for different reasons, but I still think it's great. I watch this film a lot. But I'm with you. I do prefer the first film. I just feel the first film has such a great kind of... And you kept saying gritty, and gritty is the perfect word to describe the first film. I think it gives it like a real edge and just a real unique identity that makes it stand out from the rest of the series, and it's why I've always been drawn to it. And I just love the kind of energy and the tone from it. And I love this film as well, and I love its energy and I love its tone and what it's trying to do. But there's just something about that first film that resonates more for me than this one. But that's no shade on this one. This one is the most popular for very good reasons. And if this is your favorite of the Terminator films, I'm not going to argue with you. It's a perfectly valid opinion. I completely understand, because I love it as well. But I love the first film more. So as we kind of wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to say about the Terminator, Terminator 2, the two films together?
Well, first of all, I want to shout out the cinema in general for actually showing these two films back to back. As I said before, without that, we probably wouldn't be doing this episode.
It seems unlikely. I agree.
It seems like a weird coincidence that one day that you and I went to the cinema to see a double billing of Terminator 1 and 2 ended up in a podcast.
Here we are now.
How time flies. And I mean, I don't even know what year that was. That was like...
2015?
Something like that, yeah. It's been years and years ago. It is absolutely crazy. For that reason, Terminator 1 and 2 will always hold like a nostalgic place for me. Whether I've got gripes with the film, I honestly think that this is the golden age of Terminator, and for good reason. These films they're a lot of fun to watch. They'll have you on the edge of your seat. You'll just have such a great time. And although we're probably going to get a little bit negative into the next couple of episodes, I'm not going to lie, we are going to get a little bit negative, but see, until then, honestly, if you haven't seen Terminator 1 and 2, what are you doing? Go watch them. Go check it out. Honestly, you're not going to regret watching them. So, yeah, that's all I would have to say. They're both absolutely fantastic films.
Well said. Again, completely co-sign. Who knows? Maybe we'll be really positive through the next couple episodes. Who knows? Can you read the future, Satsunami?
Well, the future's not set.
Exactly. But we all know we're going to be really negative, so I hope you enjoyed this wave of positivity while it was here.
You said you wouldn't be negative. Negative. We only postponed the positivity.
Oh my god. Well, that perfectly sets up for what we will be tackling next. As we've said, this is Terminator month, as we have dubbed it. So since we've covered Terminator 1 and Terminator 2, it only makes logical sense in the next episode that we're going to look at Terminator 3 and Terminator Salvation. Then in the episode after that, we will be looking at Terminator Genesis, and then the last film, the most recent film in the Terminator series, Terminator Dark Fate. And then, because I presume those two episodes might be a little bit tricky, a little bit taxing for us both, we thought we'd round Terminator month out with another quiz. So we'll be having a quiz on the Terminator series, but this time it'll be me sitting in the imposing question chair and Satsu sitting across, hoping he's done his homework. Look forward to all that in the episodes to come as we speed on with Terminator month and see if we can take down these damn PBs and reclaim the future and reclaim hope. But thank you once again, Satsu, for watching these films and for being the one who suggested Terminator month. And believe me, I was thrilled when you mentioned it. I couldn't say yes quick enough.
To be honest, it only felt natural. Like, after doing Halo month and Sonic month and all the months we've actually got planned for the future episodes, slight spoilers. But no, honestly, it was a pleasure watching these films again because they are fantastic films, and it was a lot of fun going back and watching good films for once for this podcast.
I know, it feels weird, doesn't it? It feels wrong in many ways to be watching good films.
Well, then again, we did go back and watch a bad film. Actually, 4 of them. So, yeah.
Good point. I'm forgetting there's more to this series. I'm like, oh, that was fun, Terminator month. What fun I had doing this. And we're done. Then you throw a copy of Salvation in my face.
That's what you're getting for your Christmas.
Yay! My favourite film, apparently.
What do you mean, apparently?
I mean, it was on a podcast. It's official now.
Yeah, exactly. Do you think people would go on the internet and just lie? Come on now.
I mean, I'm sorry for ever suggesting that would be the case.
Terrible business.
Well, thank you once again, Satsu, for joining me on this retrospective. And thank you to everyone for listening. Without further ado, stay safe, stay awesome, stay undercover while the PBs are doing their sweeps. And most importantly, stay hydrated. And we'll see you in the next episode.